Starting now.
Black Clock Audio Tales, May 2019, Hawaiian Folklore and Legends, edited by Daniel Spitzer, music by Kevin MacLeod. Help the show by sharing, rating, liking, or 5-star giving wherever you listen to or rate podcasts. Support the show by hitting the Patreon button on pgttcm.podbean.com or by going to paypal.me/pgttcm, and don't forget to visit pgttcm.com. Brought to you by BunnySlippers.com. Check out their new Dino Sound Slippers. Is that the name? They roar every third step. Very cool.
Recording by Linda Marie Nielsen, Vancouver, BC. The Legends and Myths of Hawaii by King David Kalakaua. Kala, the Flower of Lanai. A story of the sprouting cave of Palikaholo. 1. Beneath one of the boldest of the rocky bluffs against which dash the breakers of Kamaluapau Bay on the little island of Lanai is the Pulu Kala, or sprouting cave of Kala. The only entrance to it is through the vortex of a whirlpool, which marks the place where, at intervals, the receding waters rise in a column of foam above the surface. Within, the floor of the cave gradually rises from the opening beneath the waters until a landing is reached above the level of the tides, and to the right and left, farther than the eye can penetrate by the dim light struggling through the surging waves, stretch dank and shelly shores, where crabs, polypi, stingrays, and other noisome creatures of the deep find protection against their larger enemies. This cavern was once a favorite resort of Mu'ali, the great lizard god, but as the emissaries of Ukanipo, the shark god, annoyed him greatly and threatened to imprison him within it by piling a mountain of rocks against the opening, he abandoned it and found a home in a cave near Kualapapa, in the neighboring island of Molokai, where many rude temples were erected to him by the fishermen. Before the days of Kamehameha I, resolute divers frequently visited the sprouting cave, and on one occasion, fire, enclosed in a small calabash, was taken down through the whirlpool, with the view of making a light and exploring its mysterious chambers. But the fire was scattered and extinguished by an unseen hand, and those who brought it hastily retreated to escape a shower of rocks sent down upon them from the roof of the cavern. The existence of the cave is still known, and the whirlpool and sprouting column marking the entrance to it are pointed out. But longer and longer have grown the intervals between the visits of divers to its sunless depths, and the present generation can point to not more than one, perhaps, who has ventured to enter them. Tradition has brought down the outlines of a number of supernatural and romantic stories connected with the sprouting cave, but the nearest complete and most recent of these mukalos is the legend of Kala, the flower of Lanai, which is here given at considerably less length than native narration accords it. It was during an interval of comparative quiet, if not peace, in a stormy career of Kamehameha I, near the close of the last century, and after the battle of Manalei, that he went with his court to the island of Lanai for a brief season of recreation. The visit was not made for the purpose of worshipping at the great heiau of Kaaloa, which was then half in ruins, or at any of the lesser temples scattered here and there over the little island, and dedicated in most instances to fish gods. He went to Keelia simply to enjoy a few days of rest away from the scenes of his many conflicts, and feast for a time upon the affluent fishing grounds of that locality. He made the journey with 6 double canoes, all striped with yellow, and his own bearing the royal ensign. He took with him his war god Kali, and a small army of attendants, consisting of priests, kahunas, kahili, and spittoon bearers, stewards, cooks, and other household servants, as well as a retinue of distinguished chiefs, with their personal retainers in their own canoes, and 100 warriors in the capacity of a royal guard. Landing, the victorious chief was received with enthusiasm by the 5,000 or 6,000 people then inhabiting the island. He took up his residence in the largest of the several cottages provided for him and his personal attendants. Provisions were brought in abundance, and flowers and sweet-scenting herbs and vines were contributed without stint. The chief and his titled attendants were garlanded with them. They were strewn in his path, cast at his door, and thrown upon his dwelling, until their fragrance seemed to fill all the air. Among the many who brought offerings of flowers was the beautiful Kaila, the sweet-scented flower of Lanai, as she was called. She was a girl of 15, and in grace and beauty had no peer on the island. She was the daughter of Opunai, a chief of one of the lower grades, and her admirers were counted by the hundreds. Of the many who sought her as a wife was Mailu, the bone breaker. He was a huge, muscular savage, capable of crushing almost any ordinary man in an angry embrace. And while Kayla hated, feared, and took every occasion to avoid him, her father favored his suit, doubtless pleased at the thought of securing a son-in-law, a friend and champion so distinguished for his strength and ferocity. As Kayla scattered flowers before the chief, her graceful movements and modesty were noted by Kalali, and when he saw her face, he was enraptured with his beauty. Although young in years, he was one of Kamehameha's most valued lieutenants, and had distinguished himself in many battles. He was of chiefly blood and bearing, with sinewy limbs and a handsome face. And when he stopped to look into the eyes of Kala and tell her that she was beautiful, she thought the words, although they had been frequently spoken to her by others, had never sounded so sweetly to her before. He asked her for a simple flower, and she twined a lei for his neck. He asked her for a smile, and she looked up into his face and gave him her heart. They saw each other the next day, and the next, and then Kailali went to his chief and said, "I love the beautiful Kala, daughter of Opuni. Your will is law. Give her to me for a wife." For a moment Kamehameha smiled without speaking, and then replied, "The girl is not mine to give. We must be just. I will send for her father. Come tomorrow." Kalai had hoped for a different answer, but neither protest nor further explanation was admissible, and all he could do was to thank the king and retire. A messenger brought Opuni to the presence of Kamehameha. He was received kindly and told that Kalali loved Kala and desired to make her his wife. The information kindled the wrath of Opuni. He hated Kailai, but did not dare to exhibit his animosity before the king. He was in the battle of Monalei, where he narrowly escaped death at the hands of Kalai, after his spear had found the heart of one of his dearest friends, and he felt that he would rather give his daughter to the sharks than to one who had sought his life and slain his friend. But he pretended to regard the proposal with favor, and in answer to the king expressed regret that he had promised his daughter to Mailu, the bone breaker. "However," he continued, "in respect to the interest which it has pleased you, great chief, to take in the matter, I am content that the girl shall fall to the victor in a contest with bare hands between Mailu and Kalali." The proposal seemed to be fair, and not doubting that Kalali would promptly accept it, the king gave it his approval, and the contest was fixed for the day following. Opuni received the announcement with satisfaction, not doubting that Mailu would crush Kalali in his rugged embrace as easily as he had broken the bones of many an adversary. News of the coming contest spread rapidly, and the next day thousands of persons assembled at Keelia to witness it. Kala was in agony of fear. The thought of becoming the wife of the bone breaker almost distracted her, for it was said that he had many wives, all of whom had disappeared one after another as he tired of them, and the whisper was that he had crushed and thrown them into the sea. And besides, she loved Kalili and deemed it scarcely possible that he should be able to meet and successfully combat the prodigious strength and ferocity of one who had never been subdued. As Kalili was approaching the spot where the contest was to take place, in the presence of Kamehameha and his court, and a large concourse of less distinguished spectators, Kala sprang from the side of her father, and, seizing the young chief by the hand, exclaimed, "You have indeed slain my people in war, but rescue me from the horrible embrace of the bone breaker, and I will catch the squid and beat the kappa for you all my days." With a dark frown upon his face, Opunoi tore the girl from her lover before he could reply. Kalali followed her with his eyes until she disappeared among the spectators, and then pressed forward through the crowd and stepped within the circle reserved for the combatants. Mailu was already there. He was indeed a muscular brute, with long arms, broad shoulders, and mighty limbs tattooed with figures of sharks and birds of prey. He was naked to the loins, and, as Kali approached, his fingers opened and closed, as if impatient to clutch and tear his adversary in pieces. Although less bulky than the bone breaker, Kali was large and perfectly proportioned, with well-knit muscles and loins and shoulders suggested of unusual strength. Nude, with the exception of a marrow, he was a splendid specimen of vigorous manhood, but in comparison with those of the bone breaker, his limbs appeared to be frail and feminine, and a general expression of sympathy for the young chief was observed in the faces of the large assemblage as they turned from him to the sturdy giant he was about to encounter. The contest was to be one of strength, courage, agility, and skill combined. Blows with the clenched fist, grappling, strangling, tearing, breaking, and every other injury which it was possible to inflict were permitted. In hokoko, wrestling, and moko, boxing, contests, certain rules were usually observed, in order that fatal injuries might be avoided, but in the combat between Kaili and Malu, no rule nor custom was to govern. It was to be a savage struggle to the death. Taunt and boasting are the usual prelude to personal conflicts among the uncivilized, nor was it deemed unworthy the Saxon knight to meet his adversary with insult and bravado. The object was no more to unnerve his opponent than to steel his own courage. With the bone breaker, however, there was little fear or doubt concerning the result. He knew the measure of his own prodigious strength, and with a malignant smile that laid bare his shark-like teeth, he glared with satisfaction upon his rival. "Ha ha!" laughed the bone breaker, taking a stride toward Kalili. "So you are the insane youth who has dared to meet Malu in combat. Do you know who I am? I am the bone breaker. In my hands the limbs of men are like tender cane. Come, and with one hand let me strangle you." "You will need both," replied Kalili. "I know you. You are a breaker of bones of women, not of men. You speak brave words, but have the heart of a coward. Let the word be given, and if you do not run from me to save your life, as I have suspect you will, I will put my foot upon your broken neck before you find time to cry for mercy." Before Malu could retort, the word was given, and with an exclamation of rage, he sprang at the throat of Kalili. Feigning as if to meet the shock, the latter waited until the hands of Malu were almost at his throat, when, with a quick movement, he struck them up, swayed his body to the left, and with his right foot adroitly tripped his overconfident assailant. The momentum of Malu was so great that he fell headlong to the earth. Springing upon him before he could rise, Kalali seized his right arm, and with a vigorous blow of the foot, broke the bone below the elbow. Rising and finding his right arm useless, Malu attempted to grapple his adversary with the left, but a well-delivered blow felled him again to the earth, and Kalali broke his left arm as he had broken the right. Regaining his feet and unable to use either hand, with a wild howl of despair, the bone breaker rushed upon Kalali with the view of dealing him a blow with his bent head. But the young chief again tripped him as he passed, and seizing him by the hair as he fell, placed his knees against the back of his prostrate foe and broke his spine. This, of course, ended the struggle, and Kalali was declared the victor, amidst the plaudits of the spectators and the congratulations of Kamehameha and the court. Breaking from her father, who was grievously disappointed at the unlooked-for result, and who sought to detain her, Kala sprang through the crowd and threw herself into the arms of Kali. Opuni would have protested and asked that his daughter might be permitted to visit her mother before becoming the wife of Kali. But the king put an end to his hopes by placing the hand of Kala in that of the victorious chief, and saying to him, "You have won her nobly. She is now your wife. Take her with you." Although silenced by the voice of the king and compelled to submit to the conditions of a contest which he had himself proposed, Opuni's hatred of Kali knew no abatement, and all that day and the night following he sat alone by the seashore, devising a means by which Kala and her husband might be separated. He finally settled upon a plan. The morning after her marriage, Opuni visited Kala, as if he had just returned from Mahana, where her mother was supposed to be then living. He greeted her with apparent affection, and was profuse in his expressions of friendship for Kali. He embraced them both and said, "I now see that you love each other. My prayer is that you may live long and happily together." He then told Kala that Kalani, her mother, was lying dangerously ill at Mahana, and believing that she would not recover, desired to see and bless her daughter before she died. Kala believed the story, for her father wept when he told it, and moaned as if for the dead, and beat his breast, and with many protestations of love, Kali allowed her to depart with Opuni, with the promise from both of them that she would speedily return to the arms of her husband. With some misgivings, Kali watched her from the top of the hill above Kalia until she descended into the valley of Palawi. There, leaving the path that led to Mahana, they journeyed toward the bay of Kamalapau. Satisfied that her father was for some purpose deceiving her, Kala protested and was about to return when he acknowledged that her mother was not ill at Mahana, as he had represented to Kahali, in order to secure his consent to her departure. But at the seashore, where she had gathered crabs, shrimps, limpets, and other delicacies, and prepared a feast in celebration of her marriage. Reassured by this plausible story, and half disposed to pardon the deception admitted by her father, Kala proceeded with him to the seashore. She saw that her mother was not there, and heard no sound but the beating of the waves against the rocks. She looked up into the face of her father for an explanation, but his eyes were cold, and a cruel smile upon his lips told her better than words that she had been betrayed. "Where is my mother?" she inquired, and then bitterly added, "I do not see her fire by the shore. Must we search for her among the sharks?" Opuni no longer sought to disguise his real purpose. "Hear the truth," he said, with a wild glare in his eyes that whitened the lips of Kala. "The shark shall be your mate, but he will not harm you. You shall go to his home, but he will not devour you. Down among the gods of the sea I will leave you until Kahali, hated by me above all things that breathe, shall have left Lanai, and then I will bring you back to earth." Terrified at these words, Kala screamed and sought to fly, but her heartless father seized her by the hand and dragged her along the shore until they reached a bench of the rocky bluff overlooking the opening to the sprouting cave. Opuni was among the few who had entered the cavern through its gate of circling waters, and he did not for a moment doubt that within its gloomy walls, where he was about to place her, Kala would remain secretly hidden until such time as he might choose to restore her to the light. Standing upon the narrow ledge above the entrance to the cave, marked by alternate whirlpool and receding column, Kala divined the barbarous purpose of her father, and implored him to give her body to the sharks at once, rather than leave her living in the damp and darkness of the sprouting cave, to be tortured by the slimy and venomous creatures of the sea. Deaf to her entreaties, Opuni watched until the settling column went down into the throat of the whirlpool, when he gathered the frantic and struggling girl in his arms and sprang into the circling abyss, sinking a fathom or more below the surface, and impelled by a strong current setting toward the mouth of the cave, he soon found and was swept through the entrance, and in a few moments stood upon a rocky beach in the dim twilight of the tavern, with the half-conscious Kala clinging to his neck. The only light penetrating the cave was the little refracted through the waters, and every object that was not too dark to be seen looked greenish and ghostly. Crabs, eels, stingrays, and other noisome creatures of the deep were crawling stealthily among the rocks, and the dull thunder of the battling waves was the only sound that could be distinguished. Disengaging her arms, he placed her among the beach above the reach of the waters, and then sat down beside her to recover his breath and wait for a retreating current to bear him to the surface. Reviving, Kala looked around her with horror and piteously implored her father not to leave her in that dreadful place beneath the waters. For some time he made no reply, and then it was to tell her harshly that she might return with him if she would promise to accept the love of the chief of Olowahu in the valley of Palawai, and allow Kailai to see her in the embrace of another. This she refused to do, declaring that she would perish in the cave, or the attempt to leave it, rather than be liberated on such monstrous conditions. "Then here you will remain," said Oponui savagely, "until I return, or the chief of Olonuwau comes to bear you off to his home in Maui." Then rising to his feet, he continued hastily, as he noted a turn in the current at the opening. "You cannot escape without assistance. If you attempt it, you will be dashed against the rocks and become the food of sharks." With this warning, Opunui turned and plunged into the water. Diving and passing with the current through the entrance, he was borne swiftly to the surface and to his full length up into the sprouting column. But he coolly precipitated himself into the surrounding waters, and with a few strokes of the arms reached the shore. 2. Ka'ali watched the departure of Kala and her father until they disappeared in the valley of Palawai, and then gloomily returned to his hut. His fears troubled him. He thought of his beautiful Kala, and his heart ached for her warm embrace. Then he thought of the looks and words of Opuni, and recalled in both a suggestion of deceit. Thus harassed with his thoughts, he spent the day in roaming alone among the hills, and the following night in restless slumber, with dreams of death and torture. The portentous cry of an alay roused him from his kapamo before daylight, and until the sun rose he sat watching the stars. Then he climbed the hill overlooking the valley of Palawai to watch for the return of Kala, and wonder what could have detained her so long. He watched until the sun was well up in the heavens, feeling neither thirst nor hunger, and at length saw a pau fluttering in the wind far down the valley. A woman was rapidly approaching, and his heart beat with joy, for he thought she was Kala. Nearer and nearer she came, and Kalai, still hopeful, ran down to the path to meet her. Her step was light and her air graceful, and it was not until he had opened his arms to receive her that he saw that the girl was not Kala. She was Ua, the friend of Kala, and almost her equal in beauty. They had been reared together, and in their love for each other were like sisters. They loved the same flowers, the same wild songs of the birds, the same paths among the hills. And now that Kala loved Kalili, Ua loved him also. Recognizing Kalili as she approached, Ua stopped before him and bent her eyes to the ground without speaking. "Where is Kala?" inquired Kalili, raising the face of Ua and staring eagerly into it. "Have you seen her? Has any ill come to her? Speak." "I have not seen her, and know of no ill that has befallen her," replied the girl. "But I have come to tell you that Kala has not yet reached the hut of Kalani, her mother, and as Opuni, with a dark look in his face, was seen to lead her through the forest of Kumuku, it is feared that she has been betrayed, and will not be allowed to return to Kelea. And that, too, has been my fear since the moment I lost sight of her in the valley of Palawai," says Kalili. "I should not have trusted her father, for I knew him to be treacherous and unforgiving. May the wrath of the gods follow him if harm has come to her through his cruelty. But I will find her if she is on the island. The gods have given her to me, and in life or death she shall be mine." Terrified at the wild looks and words of Kalili, Ua clasped her hands in silence. "Hark!" he continued, bending his ear toward the valley. "It seems that I hear her calling for me now." And with an exclamation of rage and despair, Ka'ali started at a swift pace down the path taken by Kala the day before. As he hurried onward, he saw, at intervals, the footprints of Kala in the dust, and every imprint seemed to increase his speed. Reaching a point where the Mahana path diverged from the somewhat broader ala of the valley, he followed it for some distance, hoping that Ua had been misinformed, and that Kala had really visited her mother and might be found with her. But when he looked for and failed to find the marks of her feet, where in reason they should have been seen had she gone to Mahana with her father, he returned and continued his course down the valley. Suddenly he stopped. The footprints for which he was watching had now disappeared from the Palawai path, and for a moment he stood looking irresolutely around, as if in doubt concerning the direction next to be pursued. In his uncertainty, several plans of action presented themselves. One was to see what information could be gathered from Kala's mother at Mahana, another to follow the Palawai Valley to the sea, and a third to return to Kelia and consult a koala. While these various suggestions were being rapidly canvassed, and before any conclusion could be reached, the figure of a man was seen approaching from the valley below. Kalali secreted himself behind a rock, where he could watch the path without being seen. The man drew nearer and nearer, until at last Kalali was enabled to distinguish the features of Oponui, of all men the one whom he most desired to meet. His muscles grew rigid with wrath, and his hot breath burned the rock behind which he was crouching. He buried his fingers in the earth to teach them patience, and clenched his teeth to keep down a struggling exclamation of vengeance. And so he waited until Oponui reached a curve in the path which brought him, in passing, within a few paces of the eyes that were savagely glaring upon him, and the next moment the two men stood facing each other. Startled at the unexpected appearance of Kali, Opuni betrayed his guilt at once by attempting to fly. But with the cry of "Give me Kala," Kali sprang forward and endeavored to seize him by the throat. A momentary struggle followed, but Oponui was scarcely less powerful than his adversary, and his shoulders being bare, he succeeded in breaking from the grasp of Kali and seeking safety in flight toward Kelia. With a cry of disappointment, Kali started in pursuit. Both were swift of foot, and the race was like that of a hungry shark following his prey. One was inspired by fear, and the other with rage, and every muscle of the runners was strained. Leaving the valley path, Oponui struck for Keala by a shorter course across the hills. He hoped the roughness of the route and his better knowledge of it would give him an advantage, but Kali kept closely at his heels. On they sped, up and down hills, across ravines and along rocky ridges, until they reached Kelia, where Oponui suddenly turned to the left and made a dash for the temple and Puhona not far distant. Kali divined his purpose, and with a last supreme effort sought to thwart it. Gaining ground with every step, he made a desperate grasp at the shoulder of Oponui, just as the latter sprang through the entrance and dropped to the earth exhausted within the protecting walls of the Puhona. Kali attempted to follow, but two priests promptly stepped into the portal and refused to allow him to pass. "Stand out of the way, or I'll strangle you both," exclaimed Kali fiercely as he threw himself against the guards. "Are you insane?" said another long-haired priest, stepping forward with a taboo staff in his hand. "Do you not know that this is a Puhona, sacred to all who seek its protection? Would you bring down upon yourself the wrath of the gods by shedding blood within its walls?" "If I may not enter, then drive him forth," replied Kali, pointing towards Oponui, who was lying upon the ground a few paces within, intently regarding the proceedings at the gate. "That cannot be," returned the priest. "Should he will to leave, the way will not be closed to him, otherwise he may remain in safety." "Coward!" cried Kali, addressing Oponui in a taunting tone. "Is it thus that you seek protection from the anger of an unarmed man? A pow would be better become you than a marrow. You should twine lays and beat kappa with women, and think no more of the business of men. Come without the walls, if your trembling limbs will bear you, and I will serve you, as I did your friend, the breaker of woman's bones. Come, and I will tear from your throat the tongue that lied to Kala, and feed it to the dogs. A malignant smile wrinkled the face of Oponui as he thought of Kala in her hiding place under the sea, but he made no reply. Do you fear me? Continued Kali. Then arm yourself with a spear and battle axe, and with bare hands I will meet and strangle you. Oponui remained silent, and in a paroxysm of rage and disappointment, Ka'ali threw himself upon the ground and cursed the taboo that barred him from his enemy. His friends found and bore him to his hut, and Ua, with gentle arts and loving hands, sought to soothe and comfort him, but he would not be consoled. He talked and thought alone of Kala, and hastily, partaking of food that he might regain his strength, started again in search of her. Pitying his distress, Ua followed him, not closely, but so that she might not lose sight of him altogether. He traveled in every direction, stopping neither for food nor rest. Of every one he met, he inquired for Kala, and called her name in the deep valleys and on the hill tops. Wandering near the sacred spring at the head of the waters of Keala, he met a white-haired priest bearing from the fountain a calabash of water for ceremonial use in one of the temples. The priest knew and feared him, for his looks were wild, and humbly offered him water. I ask not for food or water, old man, said Kali. You are a priest, perhaps a kaula. Tell me where I can find Kala, the daughter of Oponui, and I will pile your altars with sacrifices. Son of the long spear, replied the priest, I know you seek the sweet-smelling flower of Palawai. Her father alone knows of her hiding place, but it is not here in the hills, nor is it in the valleys. Oponui loves and frequents the sea. He hunts for the squid in dark places, and dives for the great fish in deep waters. He knows of cliffs that are hollow, and of caves with entrances below the waves. He goes alone to the rocky shore, and sleeps with the fish gods, who are his friends. No more of him, interrupted the chief impatiently. Tell me what has become of Kala. Be patient, and you shall hear, resumed the priest. In one of the caverns of the sea, known to Oponui and others, has Kala been hidden. So I see her now. The place is dark, and her heart is full of terror. Hasten to her. Be vigilant, and you will find her. But sleep not, or she will be the food of the creatures of the sea. Thanking the priest, Kali started toward the bay of Kaumapau, followed by the faithful Ua, and did not rest until he stood upon the bluff of Palikaholo, overlooking the sea. Wildly the waves beat against the rocks. Looking around, he could discern no hiding place along the shore, and the thunder of the breakers and the screams of the seagulls were the only sounds to be heard. In despair, he raised his voice and wildly exclaimed, Kala, O Kala, where are you? Do you sleep with the fish gods? And must I seek you in their homes among the sunken shores? The bluff where he was standing overlooked and was immediately above the sprouting cave, from the submerged entrance to which a column of water was rising above the surface. and breaking into spray. In the midst of the upheaval, he thought he saw the shadowy face and form of Kala, and in the tumult of the rushing waters, fancied that he heard her voice calling him to come to her. "Kala, I come!" he exclaimed, and with a wild leap sprang from the cliff to clasp the misty form of his bride. He sank below the surface, and as the column disappeared with him, and he returned no more, Ua wailed upon the winds a requiem of love and grief in words like these: "Oh, dead is Kaali, the young chief of Hawaii, the chief of a few years and many battles. His limbs were strong and his heart was gentle. His face was like the sun, and he was without fear. Dead is the slayer of the bone breaker. Dead is the chief who crushed the bones of Malu. Dead is the lover of Kala and the loved of Ua. For his love he plunged into the deep waters. For his love he gave his life. Who is like Kaali? Kala is hidden away, and I am lonely. Kaali is dead, and the black kapa is over my heart. Now let the gods take the life of Ua." With a last look at the spot where Kaali had disappeared, Ua hastened to Keelia, and at the feet of Kamehameha told of the rash act of the disappearing husband of Kala. The king was greatly grieved at the story of Ua, for he loved the young chief almost as if he had been his son. "It is useless to search for the body of Kaali," he said, "for the sharks have eaten it." Then turning to one of his chiefs, he continued, "No pile can be raised over the bones. Send for Ulau, the poet, that a chant may be made in praise of Kaali." Approaching nearer, Papa Kua, a priest, requested permission to speak. It was granted, and he said, "Let me hope that my words may be of comfort. I have heard the story of Ua, and cannot believe that the young chief is dead. The spouting waters into which Kaali leaped mark the entrance to the cave of Palikaholo. Following downward the current, he has not been drawn into the cavern where he has found Kala, and may still be living. Such at least is my thought, great chief." "A wild thought indeed," replied the king, "yet there is some comfort in it, and we will see how much of truth it may reveal." Preparations were hastily made, and with 4 of his sturdiest oarsmen, Kamehameha started around the shore for the spouting cave under the bluff of Palikaholo, preceded by Ua in a canoe with Kawi, her brother. 3. When Kai plunged into the sea, he had little thought of anything but death. Grasping at the sprouting column as he descended, it seemed to sink with him to the surface, and even below it, and in a moment he felt himself being propelled downward and toward the cliff by a strong current. Recklessly yielding to the action of the waters, he soon discerned an opening in the submerged base of the bluff, and without an effort was drawn swiftly into it. The force of the current subsided, and to his surprise, his head rose above the surface, and he was able to breathe. His feet touched a rocky bottom, and he rose and looked around with a feeling of bewilderment. His first thought was that he was dead, and had reached the dark shores of Pau, where Milu, Prince of Death, sits enthroned in a grove of cow trees. But he smote his breast, and by the smart knew that he was living, and had been borne by the waters into a cave beneath the cliff from which he had leapt to grasp the misty form of Kala. Emerged from the water, Kali found himself standing on the shore of a dimly lighted cavern. The air was chilly, and slimy objects touched his feet, and others fell splashing into the water from the rocks. He wondered whether it would be possible for him to escape from the gloomy place, and began to watch the movements of the waters near the opening, when a low moan reached his ear. It was the voice of Kala. She was lying near him in the darkness on the slimy shore. Her limbs were bruised and lacerated with her fruitless attempts to leave the cave, and she no longer possessed the strength to repel the crabs and other loathsome creatures that were drinking her blood and feeding upon her quivering flesh. It is the wailing of the wind, or perhaps of some demon of the sea, who makes this horrible place his home, thought Kali. He feared neither death nor its ministers, yet something like a shudder possessed him as he held his breath and listened, but he heard nothing but the thunder of the breakers against the cavern walls. "Who speaks?" he exclaimed, advancing a pace or two back into the darkness. A feeble moan, almost at his feet, was the response. Stooping and peering intently before him, he distinguished what seemed to be the outlines of a human form. Approaching and bending over it, he caught the murmur of his own name. "It is Kala! Ka'ali is here!" he cried, as he tenderly folded her in his arms and bore her toward the opening. Seating himself in the dim light, he pushed back the hair from her cold face and sought to revive her with caresses and words of endearment. She opened her eyes and nestled closer to his breast, whispered to the ear that was bent to her lips, "I am dying, but I am happy, for you are here." He sought to encourage her. He told her that he had come to save her, that the gods, who loved her and would not let her die, had told him where to find her, that he would take her to his home in Kohala, and always love her as he loved her then. She made no response. There was a sad smile upon her cold lips. He placed his hand upon her heart, and found that it had ceased to beat. She was dead, but he still held the precious burden in his arms, and hour after hour he sat there on the gloomy shore of the cavern, seeing only the pallid face of Kala, and feeling only that he was desolate. At length he was aroused by the splashing of water within the cave. He looked up, and Ua, the gentle and unselfish friend of Kala, stood before him, followed a moment after by Kamehameha. The method of entering and leaving the cave was known to Kauai, and he imparted the information to his sister. Ua first leaped into the whirlpool, and the dauntless Kamehameha did not hesitate in following. As the king approached, Ka'ali rose to his feet and stood sadly before him. He uttered no word, but with bent head pointed to the body of Kala. "I see," said the king softly. "The poor girl is dead. She could have no better burial place. Come, Ka'ali, let us leave it." Ka'ali did not move. It was the first time that he had ever hesitated in obeying the orders of his chief. "What? Would you remain here?" said the king. "Would you throw your life away for a girl? There are others as fair. Here is Ua. She shall be your wife, and I will give you the valley of Palawai. Come, let us leave here at once, lest some angry god close the entrance against us." Great chief, replied Ka'ali, you have always been kind and generous to me, and never more than now. But hear me, my life and strength are gone. Kala was my life, and she is dead. How can I live without her? You are my chief. You have asked me to leave this place and live. It is the first request of yours that I have ever disobeyed. It shall be the last. Then seizing a stone with a swift, strong blow, he crushed in brow and brain, and fell dead upon the body of Kala. A wail of anguish went up from Ua. Kamehameha spoke not, moved not. Long he gazed upon the bodies before him, and his eye was moist, and his strong lip quivered as, turning away at last, he said, he loved her indeed. Wrapped in kapa, the bodies were laid side by side and left in the cavern, and there today may be seen the bones of Kala, the flower of Lanai, and of Ka'ali, her knightly lover, by such as dare to seek the passage to them through the whirlpool of Palikaholo. Melees of the story of the tragedy were composed and chanted before Kamehameha and his court at Kelea, and since then the cavern has been known as Puhi Kala, or Sprouting Cave of Kala.
Black Clock Audio Tales is edited and produced by D.B. Spitzer in Badger's Drift Studios in Portland, Oregon. You can contact us at pgttcm.com, on Facebook at Black Clock Audio Tales, and just look for us, Black Clock Audio Tales. Thank you.